It started as a routine court morning in a mid-sized southern town where justice often wore an uneven face. The courtroom buzzed as people shuffled in, lawyers with files, officers in uniform, and a few defendants waiting nervously. Among the chatter, two officers leaned against a wall near the bench, whispering and laughing at something on a phone. That's when a woman in a tailored black suit walked in, confident yet quiet, holding a leather case in one hand and a stainless steel thermos in the other. She was black, graceful, and unassuming until she made her way directly toward the judge's bench. One of the officers scoffed. "You're in the wrong place, ma'am. Public seating's that way," he said dismissively, not even glancing up. The woman paused, raised an eyebrow, and simply said, "Excuse me?" The second officer chuckled, adding, "You folks always trying to pull something. This ain't no protest rally. Get back before you're removed." Their words were loud enough to silence half the room. The woman set her case on the bench, calmly removed a black robe from it, and began putting it on. Murmurs rippled across the room. A balding clerk behind the desk quickly stood, his face turning red as he realized what was happening. "Your Honor!" "Good morning," he stammered, now standing at attention. The officers froze as she fastened the robe and took her seat with regal composure. She looked them both dead in the eyes. "Gentlemen, step forward," she commanded, voice calm but razor-sharp. "Now!" Their smugness evaporated. The courtroom had flipped in seconds, from laughter to stunned silence. The woman who they thought was out of place now sat in power, her gavel within reach, her authority absolute. What followed would not only reshape that courtroom, but put the entire department under scrutiny, and it had only just begun. The silence after Judge Helena Moore's command was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officers Daniels and Mercer, once smug and relaxed, now stood rigid, blinking as if trying to wake from a bad dream. Judge Moore motioned again, and reluctantly, the two officers approached the bench, their steps stiff with tension. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Before we begin today's docket," she said clearly for the court to hear, "we need to address something far more urgent than traffic violations or misdemeanor charges: systemic disrespect." The officers shifted uncomfortably as every pair of eyes in the room focused on them. "You assumed my presence here was improper because of my skin, my gender, or perhaps your own ignorance," she continued, her words slicing with surgical precision. "Not only did you undermine the authority of this courtroom, you embarrassed this institution before civilians, attorneys, and your peers." Daniels tried to interject. "Your Honor, I didn't mean," but she held up one finger. "No, you meant every word. You just didn't expect consequences." Her gaze turned icy. "So, let's talk about consequences." She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a small black notebook, flipping it open. "Officer Mercer, you've had 2 previous complaints for aggressive conduct. Officer Daniels, your file includes a written reprimand for racial comments made during a traffic stop." Interesting how the past echoes into the present. The courtroom murmured again. The DA, who had just entered, looked stunned. "Effective immediately, I'm ordering an internal review of both of your conduct while serving this court. You are hereby dismissed from courtroom duty until further notice." The officers' faces turned pale. This was not the career moment they expected. "And if you think this is the end of it," Judge Moore said as she lowered her gavel, "think again." She glanced toward the back of the room, where a news reporter from the local channel had just raised a camera. The next chapter of justice, it seemed, would be televised, and it was just getting started. The headlines hit the local news before noon. "Veteran judge publicly rebukes officers for racial misconduct in courtroom." By evening, the story had gone national. Social media lit up with clips of Judge Helena Moore standing firm behind her bench, calm yet commanding, a living example of dignity under fire. But behind the scenes, the situation was far from over. That evening, in the privacy of her chambers, Judge Moore sat with her hands folded beneath her chin, eyes scanning the formal complaints she had requested from the Court Conduct Oversight Committee. She was no stranger to discrimination. She'd endured it in law school, on the bench, and even at family barbecues from those who doubted a black woman could wear a robe of power. But this was different. This was direct, public, brazen, and it required more than a symbolic response. As she sifted through the misconduct records and internal affairs documentation, she noticed a pattern, not just with officers Daniels and Mercer, but a handful of repeat offenders who'd been shuffled from courtroom to courtroom with little more than slaps on the wrist. Enough was enough. She picked up the phone and dialed the chief of police directly. "Chief Reynolds," she began, her tone even but sharp. "I'm invoking judicial privilege to call for a formal inquiry into officer behavior during court proceedings across this county. This isn't about one moment. It's about a pattern your department has been ignoring for years." The chief sighed, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, I agree the incident was regrettable, but going this far," she cut him off. "No, Chief. What's regrettable is that it took national media attention for anyone to take this seriously. I'm done waiting for change. I'm going to make it." The next day, Moore addressed the Bar Association, revealing her proposal for a mandatory courtroom conduct and cultural competency training for all law enforcement officers assigned to the judicial circuit. Many clapped. Some rolled their eyes, but Helena didn't care. She wasn't looking for applause. She was building a legacy. Word of her bold stance spread fast, especially within marginalized communities. People started showing up to her court just to watch her work, not as defendants, but as witnesses to justice being served by someone who looked like them and spoke for them. Meanwhile, the two officers, Daniels and Mercer, found themselves suspended pending full investigation. Their union tried to spin the situation as a misunderstanding, but the footage didn't lie, and neither did Helena's record of integrity. The department scrambled to respond to the growing pressure. At a town hall meeting later that week, Judge Moore took the microphone, standing before a sea of citizens, Black, white, Latino, Asian, all watching her with a mix of awe and hope. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice strong. "Respect is not optional. Not in this courtroom. Not in this community. Not anywhere." Thunderous applause followed. In that moment, Helena knew she had cracked the first layer of the foundation. The system was flawed, yes, but it wasn't immovable. And if they wouldn't give her a seat at the table of reform, she'd build a new table entirely. The investigation gained momentum faster than anyone expected. Internal Affairs launched interviews, court security footage was reanalyzed, and officers who once felt untouchable were suddenly under the microscope. Judge Helena Moore didn't stop there. She partnered with civil rights attorneys to propose legislation requiring body cams to remain active inside all courtrooms during officer testimony and detainee transport. The backlash was immediate. Police unions protested, citing hostile work environments, and some conservative media outlets tried to paint her as anti-cop. But the community knew better. Helena wasn't anti-anyone, she was anti-injustice. Meanwhile, a surprising ally stepped forward. Retired Judge Anthony Carlisle, an old white man who'd served on the bench for nearly 3 decades. He called a press conference and, standing beside Helena, declared, "I've watched the way this system eats its own, especially when those people don't fit the mold. Judge Moore isn't overreacting, she's correcting what we've tolerated for far too long." His words carried weight, especially among the skeptics. Inside the courtroom, the shift was palpable. Officers once dismissive now stood straighter, more careful with their language and demeanor. Defendants, especially young Black and brown men, noticed the difference too. They no longer walked into Helena's courtroom expecting disrespect as the default. And while change wasn't universal or immediate, the tide was turning. Helena knew the real challenge wasn't punishing 2 officers, it was changing an entire culture. But now, she wasn't alone. Other judges began following her lead. Training programs were adopted, and slowly the courthouse, a place once feared by many, started to feel like a space where justice didn't just wear a blindfold, but finally opened her eyes. Months passed, and the courthouse had changed, subtly but unmistakably. Judge Helena Moore stood taller than ever, not because her title had changed, but because the weight she carried had finally begun to shift. The 2 officers who had disrespected her were formally reprimanded and reassigned, while broader training initiatives were implemented across the district. But It wasn't just about punishment, it was about awareness. What shocked everyone the most wasn't Helena's authority or her ability to make waves, it was her grace. She never raised her voice, never sought vengeance. Instead, she educated, reformed, and rebuilt. One morning, during a highly publicized trial, Helena entered the courtroom and the room stood, not out of obligation, but out of deep respect. Even those who once doubted her now recognized her as a symbol of justice and resilience. Outside the courthouse, children pointed at her portrait, recently unveiled in the lobby, a rare honor for a living judge. "That's the lady who changed the rules," one whispered to his mother. But Helena didn't need statues or recognition. Her true reward came when a young law student approached her one evening and said, "I didn't think someone like me belonged in law until I watched how you handled them." That moment meant more than any accolade. Helena knew the battle wasn't over. Bias still lingered in corners and shadows. But now there was light, and she had become the torchbearer. She didn't just wear the robe, she gave it new meaning. Where others might have backed down or stayed silent, she rose up, and in doing so, reminded the entire system what true justice looks like: calm, courageous, and unapologetically fair.